Okay. All right, I think we're going. So, Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, welcome everyone to this afternoon Sutta study. Happy Wesak. I'm being asked who I am. I'm getting to that. I am Kaccayana Bhikkhuni. I'm filling in for Ayasopana as she is away at another temple attending their Vesak event today. She should be back on Tuesday evening. So, if you were expecting to see her and I'm a disappointment, I apologize. But we'll do our best. Yes, it is the Wesak season, and I think probably most of you are familiar with the concept of Wesak, but just to review, this is the day in this tradition that commemorates the birth and the awakening and the passing away, the parinibbana of the Buddha. And you can see those three events commemorated on our altar here with the little baby Buddha in the middle and the Mahaparinibbana Buddha down at the bottom. So for your reminder throughout the day, you can look at that. This year is a little bit odd in terms of the scheduling because it has one extra moon in the year, one extra full moon day. They call it a lunar leap year. And the different Theravada traditions have chosen differently about how to manage the extra moon. So usually Vesak is the full moon of May, which was this past Friday. But this year, some parts of the Theravada tradition will be celebrating on the full moon of May, others on the full moon of June. And here for Dhammadharini, we've decided basically just to have a whole month of Vesak. So our teachings for the next 3 weeks will be Vesak themed, culminating in our Vesak event here, public event. People are welcome to come and join us in person or online on May 27th. Is that a Saturday or a Sunday? I think it's Saturday. That's a Saturday. Okay, Saturday, May 27th. And so that will be our big Wesak event leading up to the June full moon. But we'll be having these themed teachings leading up till then. Starting this week with special focus on the birth of the Bodhisattva as the first of the 3 great events that we're commemorating. I'm talking to some other people off screen here. Let me show you who's here. We have here Venerable Dhammawara Bhikkhuni and Seminary Tavira. And then also we have another friend in the room who does not want to be on the camera. So, but she's here to listen to the Dhamma. And so happy to see all of you online with us today. All right, so those who were here this morning, we were practicing Buddhanusati, the recollection of the Buddha, a recommended practice to sort of uplift the mind and heart and sort of direct it in the way that is good, in the way that is aligned with the Dhamma, aligned with awakening. by reflecting on the wonderful, marvelous qualities of the Buddha. So we did that in meditation this morning, and we're going to continue on that theme for the Sutta study this afternoon. So I'm going to start with the Sutta. This is, let me put it in the chat if you'd like to have it on your own device. I'm putting links in the chat, and I will be screen sharing also. First Sutta here is an excellent one related to the birth of the Buddha, called Incredible and Amazing. Okay, so this is Majjhima Nikaya 123. This is Bhante Sujato's translation, Acharya Bhuta Sutta. All right, so let's just dive in here. So I have heard, at one time the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. Then after the meal, on return from alms round, several mendicants sat together in the assembly hall, and this discussion came up among them. It's incredible, Reverends. It's amazing. The power and might of a realized one, it's a Tathagata. For he is able to know the Buddhas of the past who have become completely extinguished, cut off proliferation, cut off the track, finished off the cycle, and transcended suffering. He knows the caste they were born in, and also their names, clans, conduct, teaching, wisdom, meditation, and freedom. So that's quite a lot to know, actually. And the mendicants were clearly knew this quality of the Buddha and respected it, that he was able to know so much. They probably heard him speaking about it. And so that was the quality that was clear to them. Venerable Ananda, who was the Buddha's chief attendant, agreed. He was there, he said. Indeed, the realized ones are incredible, Reverends, and they have incredible qualities. They're amazing, and they have amazing qualities. But this conversation among those mendicants was left unfinished. Then in the late afternoon, the Buddha came out of retreat, went to the assembly hall, sat down on the seat spread out, and addressed the mendicants. Mendicants, what were you sitting talking about just now? What conversation was left unfinished? So the mendicants told them what they'd been talking about. And the Buddha said, well then, Ananda, say some more about the incredible and amazing qualities of the realized one. So there's laughter. I guess it does seem a little bit, a little full of himself, you think?
It's not meant that way.
Right. So Samaneri Tavira mentions, coming from the Buddha, it's not meant as being full of himself. Why not?
Yeah, I think he's not coming at it from the say more about how great I am. But I think like you were saying, there's such benefit to people of contemplating the good qualities of the Buddha. And so he's reminding them of that and wanting them to be kind of directing their minds in that way, not for the Buddha's benefit, but for their own.
Okay, are you able to hear that? Yes, okay, wonderful. Oh, barely. All right, so we have a note from Sharanya. The Buddha is setting people up for the teaching. Yes. Yes, no problem. Thank you for letting us know about the sound. It's sometimes this microphone reaches over there and sometimes not. So I think I can attempt to summarize, which is that, coming from the Buddha, it's not like he's saying, oh, I'm so great, everybody should talk about how I'm so great. It doesn't have that sense of I to it. It's more about really recognizing that he does that he is the Buddha, and that the qualities of the Buddha are good for people to reflect upon. And it's actually in a completely impersonal way. So is that a good enough summary? Okay. All right. So yes, the Buddha is encouraging people to reflect on the qualities of the Buddha, not as a personal self-aggrandizement, but just as a real recognition that the qualities of Buddhahood are worth knowing about and emulating. Okay, so then Ananda is about to say some more about the incredible and amazing qualities of the realized one. And he's going to be talking about a lot of sort of miraculous things. And well, we'll see how we feel about the miraculous things. Sir, I have heard and learned this in the presence of the Buddha. This is Venerable Ananda speaking now. Mindful and aware, the being intent on awakening was reborn in the host of joyful gods. This I remember as an incredible quality of the Buddha. So the being intent on awakening is Bhante Sujato's translation of bodhisatta, the awakening being. This is what the Buddha is. Prior to his awakening, the Buddha is called the bodhisatta. From his birth up until his awakening, he is the bodhisatta, the one who is intent upon awakening, but not yet awakened. However, the idea in the tradition is that the bodhisatta has been developing the qualities of awakening for a long time, for many, many, many lifetimes previously. And there's this whole whole group of stories about those previous lifetimes called the Jatakas, during which time the Buddha is said to have developed all of these wonderful qualities. And then Ananda here is talking about the last lifetime of the Bodhisatta prior to his birth, prior to his last birth, so second to last birth. Mindful and aware, the being intent on awakening was reborn in the host of joyful gods. So it's rare for beings to be mindful and aware at the time of their birth. I think most of us don't really remember it very well. It's also rare to be born in the host of joyful gods. This is the Tusita heaven, which is, it's a lovely place to be. It's one of the nicest places that you can be, as long as you're a being in the world. So it's interesting that, he's coming from this very lovely place. We think so much of the teaching focuses on suffering, but here he's not in a place that has a lot of suffering. He's in a heavenly realm characterized by joy. And he has mindfully sort of chosen to be there prior to his final birth. And then the second amazing quality, I have learned this in the presence of the Buddha. Mindful and aware, the being intent on awakening remained in the host of joyful gods. For the whole of that life, the being intent on awakening remained in the host of joyful gods. This too, I remember as an incredible quality of the Buddha. So he spent a whole lifetime there. And then mindful and aware, the being intent on awakening passed away from the host of joyful gods and was conceived in his mother's womb. This too, I remember as an incredible quality of the Buddha. So we can pause here for a moment. Are there any, how does it strike you that he's been in this heavenly realm, mindful and aware prior to coming here? Any reflections, anything anyone would like to come in with at this point? Does it seem inspiring? Does it seem kind of does it seem like, oh, what are these heavenly realms anyway? Ananea, are you saying something? You need to unmute.
Well, I actually don't recall.
You need to unmute, Ananea.
Oh, sorry.
Still not hearing you.
Okay, there.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
I think you're unmuted now, but I'm still not hearing you. Maybe you might be a mic difficulty.
I can hear Ananea. It must be a problem with the Dhammadharini.
Okay. There we go. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. I've got you now.
Okay. Anyway, I don't recall actually having heard or read or heard this particular sutta before, but it would seem that his spending time exclusively in Tusita heaven before incarnating his last time would have been like the prep or the resting place, a place to really gather and prepare for the incarnation that was to come, which would of course be very, very challenging. So that's kind of what it seems to me.
Yeah, I think that's kind of my sense too, is that he's gathering his strength to do what has to be done. And there's this sort of sense of, yeah, I mean, there's this mindfulness and awareness about exactly what he's doing, this sort of sense of mission and like, okay, let me go hang out with the joyful gods, but mindfully and aware that this is to support what's coming next. This sort of sense of gathering strength actually is something that I find sort of throughout this sutta. Let's see. Okay. So yes, thank you for everyone for your notes about the sound. I'm not quite sure what was going on there, but we've got you now. All right. Carrying on. Okay, so the being intent on awakening passed away from the host of joyful gods and was conceived in his mother's womb, still mindful and aware. This too I remember as an incredible quality of the Buddha. I have learned this in the presence of the Buddha. When the being intent on awakening passes away from the host of joyful gods and is conceived in his mother's womb, then, in this world with its gods, Maras and Brahmas, his population with its ascetics and Brahmins, gods and humans, an immeasurable, magnificent light appears, surpassing the glory of the gods. Even in the boundless desolation of interstellar space, so utterly dark that even the light of the moon and the sun, so mighty and powerful, makes no impression, an immeasurable, magnificent light appears, surpassing the glory of the gods. And even the sentient beings reborn there recognize each other by that light. So it seems other sentient beings have been reborn here. And this galaxy shakes and rocks and trembles, and an immeasurable, magnificent light appears in the world, surpassing the glory of the gods. This too, I remember as an incredible quality of the Buddha. So, in this sort of full-on miracle here, the great light, the shaking of the world. What I find so touching is the sentient beings living in complete darkness, suddenly able to see each other and just know that they're not alone in the world. It seems other sentient beings have been reborn here. So it's like we know something good is coming. It's like the whole world knows something good is coming. And it's reacting in this way. Patipada, yes.
It sounds very much like
the star appearing in the sky when Christ was born.
Right.
It just sounds very much like that to me.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, and this is, I think many of the great spiritual figures in the world, they have these stories that come with them that are of, great portents and omens coming at the time of their birth. And, I'm sure the text critical scholars will tell you, like, maybe those stories are a little bit later and, they got added on as a legend later. And so we could, there's different ways to look at it. I think what we want to understand, though, is like, what is the meaning of this myth? What is it to be telling us, whether it's literally true or not? There's a sort of spiritual meaning of just something good coming and lighting up the world. And I think, yeah, it's very much actually like the Christmas story, with the star leading the way, pointing out the sort of special one who's going to be a savior. And I agree, this is a very similar kind of story here. Ananea.
It does have elements that are the same. The only thing to keep in mind is that the Buddha precedes Christ's birth by, a couple of, a really extensive period of time. So it's more like the Christ story follows the Buddha. And it is true that there are cross-cultural elements of this that you can find throughout various parts of the world that have some sort of light or some huge event before the appearance of a teacher or an enlightened being.
Yeah, exactly. The Buddha's birth, they don't, the scholars can't agree on an exact date, but it's about 500 years before the birth of Christ, give or take a little bit. So yes, this one definitely came first. But yeah, I think it's more seems like a human tendency, or even we could just say a tendency of nature, that these stories of great light associated with a great being across cultures, I think comes up a lot. And
well, you could say also the Big Bang.
Sure.
Right? I mean, that supposedly preceded anything that so
right.
It's definitely part of the whatever that elemental base or whatever we want to call that wave or whatever we're part of before we take a form. The other thing though about this is that, or at least to me, is that the light is not happening like with the three wise men, right? Three astrologers in the Middle East that 2,000 years ago know that there's going to be a celestial event, and that celestial event is linked to historically a great being coming. In the Buddhist case, this light and whatever is happening prior to the incarnation, but there are also, as we know later, the same set of astrologers who know because of the celestial events, there was this being that was going to appear somewhere or near them, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So it seems really like, this is just nature responding in a way that, wasn't expected, but it came.
Just one more. I personally like that the people, a collective, received that light or were aware of that light before any other so-called expert or something. And said, "Oh, guess what? This is what's happening."
Yeah, no, I mean, this is like everyone all at once gets to see this. Yeah, all beings everywhere get to see this light.
We don't need any wise men to tell us about it.
Seminary Tavira says we don't need any wise men to tell us about it. We can see for ourselves. And yes, that is that's a property of the Dhamma. Ehipasiko, Sanditiko, apparent here and now, and inviting us to come and see for ourselves. Okay, let's go on to the next paragraph here. I learned this in the presence of the Buddha. When the being intent on awakening is conceived in his mother's belly, 4 gods approach to guard the 4 quarters, so that no human or non-human or anyone at all shall harm the being intent on awakening or his mother. This too, I remember as an incredible quality of the Buddha. Maybe this also has echoes of the wise men coming to pay homage. In this case, it's gods coming to protect, but something like that. So it's also sort of just notable. He's coming from this world of joy, and he's coming into a world that's very safe, protected, pleasant. I'm going to go on a little bit, and then we can talk a little more. When the being intent on awakening is conceived in his mother's belly, she becomes naturally ethical. She refrains from killing living creatures, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and alcoholic drinks that cause negligence. This too, I remember as an incredible quality of the Buddha. I have learned this in the presence of the Buddha. When the being intent on awakening is conceived in his mother's belly, she no longer feels sexual desire for men, and she cannot be violated by a man of lustful intent. I have learned this in the presence of the Buddha. When the being intent on awakening is conceived in his mother's belly, she obtains the 5 kinds of sensual stimulation and amuses herself, supplied and provided with them. This too, I remember as an incredible quality of the Buddha. I'm going to just keep going with the pregnancy, and then we'll talk about all the pregnancy things. I have learned this in the presence of the Buddha. When the being intent on awakening is conceived in his mother's belly, no afflictions beset her. She's happy and free of bodily fatigue, and she sees the being intent on awakening in her womb, complete with all his various parts, not deficient in any faculty. Suppose there was a beryl gem that was naturally beautiful, 8-faceted, well-worked, and it was strung with a thread of blue, yellow, red, white, or golden brown. And someone with good eyesight were to take it in their hand and examine it. This beryl gem is naturally beautiful, 8-faceted, well-worked, and it's strung with a thread of blue, yellow, red, white, or golden brown. In the same way, when the being intent on awakening is conceived in his mother's belly, no afflictions beset her. She's happy and free of bodily fatigue, and she sees the being intent on awakening in her womb, complete with all his various parts, not deficient in any faculty. This too, I remember as an incredible quality of the Buddha. So, I myself in this lifetime have not given birth, have not had this experience of pregnancy. I'm wondering, anyone who has, how does this compare? What do you think about this?
Well, I'm thinking I definitely didn't give birth to a bodhisattva because my experience was the opposite.
Ditto.
Right. So, indeed, this sounds so pleasant, right? So protected by the 4 gods. Let's take it a little slower now. When the being intended on awakening is conceived in his mother's belly, she becomes naturally ethical. She refrains from killing living creatures, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and alcoholic drinks. So, this I think is not so unusual in a way. I think people,
No.
when people become, do you want to say something, Ananaya?
Anyway, yeah.
People want to protect the
Mhm.
developing baby, right? So then they're often be refraining from,
Harmful stuff.
harmful stuff. Yeah. Though they wouldn't necessarily frame it as like ethical, right? I don't know that the average pregnant person would be, refraining from stepping on an ant or something if they're not already following 5 precepts. They might not refrain from killing or stealing or sexual misconduct. But the alcoholic drinks thing, often people do. Yeah, there's this sense of protection. But really what I get out of this is that, it's not so much about the baby, it's about like, what does the baby represent here? It's the Buddha, it's the quality of awakening. It's sort of this sense of this quality developing within her. Symbolically, the awakening is developing and getting ready to come into the world and to be born. And I think, even those who have not given birth, if they've been practicing for a long time, there can be this sense, especially if you have a secluded time on a retreat or something, where you start to feel something growing, like you get into the flow of something, and it's like, oh, there's this sense of something, like I'm on the right track, and something's developing, and there's like joy coming up, there's interest coming up, and at that time, the interest in the other things sort of starts to fall away a little bit, right? And it becomes natural to behave in an ethical way. It becomes natural to not be so interested in lust and so forth. Has anyone else experienced that? A sort of sense of something growing? I see a nod over here from our secret anyone else like to comment on that? Okay. Yeah, so, I was reading this over and thinking, like, yeah, there is this sense of sort of growing depth of practice that then is a wish to kind of protect that, but there's also just not an interest really in the other things when one's kind of in the flow of that. Feel like you're heading towards something.
What are the 5 kinds of sensual stimulation?
Right. Well, this is, when I read the first 2 about the ethical behavior, it's like, oh yeah, sure. And then you see the 5 kinds of sensual stimulation. And it's like, wait, that doesn't sound very Buddhist. Because, so often the Buddha is warning against the 5 chords of sensual pleasure, right? Yeah, so kama gunanang, desire, passion, transport furnishes sensual pleasures, subdivisions or classes of the objects of pleasure. So usually, this means like pleasant sights and sounds and smells and tastes and touches. These are the 5 strands of sensual pleasure. And usually the Buddha is saying, don't get caught up in those. There's something better out there. So then we see, okay, when his mother is pregnant, then she's having all these pleasant sights and smells and tastes and touches. So what's that about?
Well, it sounds like that those are required conditions for a happy and healthy pregnancy. And anything that affects the mother is going to affect the fetus. Mm-hmm. So, and I think there's also a cultural component to it, because I think in Asian countries, if it's possible, the would-be mother is actually really pampered with food and rest. So that could also be that piece. But for me, it just seems like those are the necessary conditions to have a healthy pregnancy, a healthy baby, and to carry it to term.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree. And the fact that his mother was not fully enlightened. So for her to have the best conditions, and that if they're within her and within her immediate sphere, she's not, it lends to her focus, as opposed to, as Sharanya was referring to, as opposed to requiring it strictly from the outside, like going somewhere or, having to have a lot of diversions, that it's more a question of containing and protecting and nourishing.
Yeah, so definitely this sort of seems to go along with the protection from the four gods protecting, and yeah, just sort of generally having a pleasant time, which I think then is actually, if the mother is well and happy, then that makes the pregnancy more easeful. If I can go back to my symbolic level, the thing that came to me when I was thinking about it, again, thinking about like the growth and the birth of the quality of awakening internally, is again like going on to a retreat experience or something. And, usually you're in a retreat container where there's not a lot of like entertainments and stuff going on. But still at a certain point, you can just like look at something and see it in a different way. Like you see a flower and, it's a nice flower, but suddenly it like hits you. It's like, oh, that's the most beautiful flower I ever saw in my life. Like all the dewdrops and the petals, and it's at this perfect stage of, whatever it is, somehow it like grabs you and you see it and you feel like, oh, this is this perfect moment of just seeing this flower. It doesn't even have to be something beautiful like a flower. You can just sort of suddenly see something and it like shifts and it's like, oh, I feel like I'm really seeing it, some kind of different altered way. Titaloka often tells the story of one time when back in the early days at the first Dhammadharini Vihara in Fremont, near the train tracks, one time she came out of meditation and heard this most amazing music, just the most beautiful heavenly sound she had ever heard in her life, like a heavenly symphony. She was like, what is that? What is this amazing heavenly symphony that I'm hearing? And it took her a minute to like identify it. She was like, oh, it's the train. It's the train idling under my window, which they did. It was quite close to the train tracks and the trains would just stop like right under the window and sit there and with the engine going for hours and hours. And normally this sound was a nuisance, for a place of meditation. But there was this one time when she came out and the whole thing shifted and was heard in a different way. And again, that's some kind of shift in the mind, something that happens when, it's not like the goal of the practice, but it's something that happens along the way. Sometimes that you can just have this big shift in perception on, somewhere along your path. So that's sort of what came to my mind thinking about this, is like, just when you're really clear and intent on the senses, there's something beautiful that comes that is outside of our usual way of perception, and is enjoyable and is pleasant. So anyway, this is just my own idea here, but it's something that came to mind, in addition to just it being a good environment for, for the person, the pregnant person.
May I say something? This is Karina.
Yes, hello, Karina. Please
Hi.
go ahead.
Sorry, yes, I'm joining a little later. I was just going to say it reminds me of this question someone had for Beth Upton regarding meditation. And they said, oh, when I meditate, I just suddenly feel my heartbeat really loud. And I don't know what to do, if I should ignore that or if there's a problem. And she said, probably your heart isn't beating any louder than it usually does, but your senses are more refined. So it sounds louder. And it kind of reminds me to the first or the previous question you asked about, why would just how the Buddha's mother really took up ethics when she became pregnant. And it kind of reminds me of my kitty. So I got a kitty not long ago, and there's something about it kind of gives you a sense of purpose, a sense of focus. And so it makes me like straighten up. I mean, my kitty it's a little more simple than it does. She doesn't make me practice per se, but she just makes me be more aware of my time, more conscious, more mindful, just so I can manage both of our days together. But I imagine, especially, I liked how you said, it's not just having a baby, but it's like having a state of, or having awakening, giving birth to awakening. It's sort of like it really focuses you. And so when I find when there's that focus, things do get more refined and intense and clear. So whether it's ethics or whether it's the senses, it's like there's like a purpose with being pregnant. And that's what came to mind.
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful. Yeah, definitely. It seems like she's getting very focused on this thing, and that it's a pleasant and beneficial experience. And that is very much part of the awakening, is the focus and also the benefit and the beauty that comes from that focus. So yeah, I think, definitely kitties, babies, whatever, they're useful. Can be.
Exactly. Yeah. Having something to give you a sense of direction or a focus.
Yeah. Care.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else now, or shall I move on? Okay, the next one. No afflictions beset her. She's happy and free of bodily fatigue. So this also doesn't sound that much like an ordinary pregnancy, as far as I've heard it reported from others. But it can be, again, like an effect of meditation, of being able to just sort of be with the unpleasant things for a while, and then after a while they can start to fall away. There can be a sense of bodily ease in the midst of even things that were painful sometimes. So that's, again, what this reminds me of. How about this part about seeing the being intent on awakening in her womb, complete with all his various parts, not deficient in any faculty, like a beryl gem? What does that say to you?
Could it be some kind of faith that she had at that time, that everything would be okay? Well, not with her, but with the baby.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this is something people worry about, right? Is how is the baby? You can't see it. All your attention is going towards it. And there's worry, right? How is this baby going to be? Is he okay in there? And she doesn't have to worry because she can see it. She can see everything.
Or maybe she had a dream that the baby was okay.
Right.
Don't have ultrasound.
Right. They're saying no ultrasound. So this is the ancient equivalent of ultrasound. Yeah, so a dream, yeah, it's not really clear how exactly is she seeing this. Is she just like looking down and it's, you know, can like see through her skin? That's a little, you know,
Well,
something-
one can, well, the Buddha would not be entering a woman's body who did not have a certain level of consciousness. So the mother more than likely had some abilities.
Mhm.
And so the energetic of the Buddha himself coming in, plus whatever her own particulars were in that regard, she could very well have had the ability to actually see him
Mhm. Yeah.
as he was developing.
Right, so through psychic powers of some sort, through a dream of some sort. Yeah, there is another story about the conception. It's not in this sutta, but there's the story that she had a dream of a white elephant entering her belly. So that, you know, that there's also that story. I'm not actually sure where that comes from. It might be commentarial. But anyway, she certainly was having different perceptions about this in some way, whether through psychic powers or through dreams or anything. But then, like the meaning here is that she wasn't needing to worry because she knew he was okay. Sort of my sense about it. Okay. Anything else here? We've got some more wonderful and amazing qualities that we haven't gotten to yet.
I sorry, I do, there is something, and it's it could just be the way I'm seeing it on beyond the sentence before. It's funny, when I read that sentence, I took the understanding in a very different way. The word that stuck out was the word intent, and not focusing on the word seeing. So it was almost what I got, the understanding I got was she connected to the intention of the being, and it's that same sort of focus kind of thing. It's like she picked up on the focus, she picked up on the intention, and the way I read the sentence was a little bit it's almost hard to differentiate between the Buddha and her, like who's intending it necessarily. It's like, because I again, they said if you're pregnant, you really want your baby to be all right with all their parts. And so similarly, it's like I almost got the feeling that like she's seeing that intention also. I don't know. Just wanted to mention that. That's how the sentence first struck me. I didn't see the word see. It's like she's seeing the intention. Yeah, like she's following through on the intention. Kind of.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, you don't really have a lot of sense of her having a different intention here. You don't really have a sense of her personality so much, other than that she's, you know, she's kind of fully on board with this pregnancy and this this child who's coming. So it's kind of her purpose and her mission.
I think to Ananea's point, it's, you know, when the Buddha is coming into his last birth, you know, he is coming together with this being who then is the mother who gives birth to him, and she's not going to be an average person either. You know, I think she was the right being to give birth to the Buddha, and so I think I think there's a very much a I don't know anything about the stories of her previous lives, but her intention, I think, was very much a part of this too.
Okay, and were you able to hear that time? Brought the mic a little bit closer.
Yes, I could hear it.
Okay, great. All right, so well, let's carry on with the amazing qualities here. This next one, I have learned this in the presence of the Buddha. 7 days after the being intent on awakening is born, his mother passes away and is reborn in the host of joyful gods. This too I remember as an incredible quality of the Buddha. So that's, this one seems a little difficult. It's like, the mother is gone suddenly. She brings the baby into the world, and then that's it. That's like, okay, mission accomplished, and then she's gone. What happens in this very sort of simple and clean sort of way, in the way it's described, it's like she just passes away. And is immediately reborn in the host of joyful gods. So it doesn't sound like a terrible thing. She's going to a good destination. She's going to the destination that the baby just came from, which is this lovely place. But yeah, any thoughts or feelings about this one? We know the Bodhisattva grows up with a foster mother. His mother's sister then raises him, Mahapajapati. Ananaya, yes?
Well, there can be a number of considerations, obviously, but one thing that most people don't realize or think about is that giving birth is actually quite dangerous to the mother. And it is not uncommon for women to die, especially that, eons ago. I mean, it still happens in this very day and age. So I'm not saying that it was purely a physical thing, because this birth, this is a very comic thing. People, these are eons of development prior to the Buddha coming into this particular mother. And then whatever her karma is that she has to leave after the 7 days or whatever that part is about. And that her sister, who was also married to the Buddha's father, so and she had a child recently, so she could become, take over for her sister instantaneously.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a lot of comic weaving in there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, it goes back to, the intention that, it does seem like she was probably developing this intention to help bring the Buddha into the world for a long time, just as the Buddha himself was developing the intention to become a Sammasambuddha, to awaken. And that is sort of, I think, how these stories are traditionally understood, is that all of it was sort of pointing towards this. So anyway, she passes away, and is reborn in the host of joyful gods. And then the story goes that later on the Buddha goes to the Sita heaven, to the host of joyful gods, and teaches her the Dhamma, and she's able to awaken from there. So this isn't the end of her story when she passes away. But right?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, I'm not sure who that is, but please go ahead.
Oh, it's Dinwi.
Sorry, got you. I see your hand now.
So this is a question about rebirth in general, and because earlier we referred to the Buddha being reborn many times in the Jakarta tales, or whatever, however you pronounce it. And here we're talking about she was immediately reborn into Sita heaven. And my question is about this idea of rebirth not as reincarnation, because it's a little confusing to me, because we're referring to this one person being reborn over and over. Mm-hmm. Yet in Buddhism, we don't refer to it as reincarnation, yet we refer to the same person having this continuity. Do you know what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah, so I mean, it is a common question, and it is, I agree, it's confusing, and it's hard to sort of answer. So, I mean, it's kind of like, the person that you are right now is not the same as the person that you were when you were, a baby. And there's so many differences between the way you are now and the way you were, 10 years ago or longer ago. And so we can see a progression in one lifetime that, people are changing every moment, and have that potential for ongoing change. And nevertheless, there is continuity. between them. And the way that it's understood is that it's just a different kind of continuity from life to life, that the actual being is not a solid thing. It's not just one person, one immortal soul that's taking on a different body each time, right? There's no immortal soul. There's just this string of continuity of experience that is connecting between the lives. So there is a sense in which they're different people. And there's also a sense in which, they are connected in this sense of continuity carrying from life to life. But it's true, it's a different name, it's a different body, it's a different family, a different upbringing, a different language. So many things from life to life can be different. It can even be from animal to human, or from human to God, or all these various things. And so in that sense, they are different people.
Mhm.
And in another sense, like the movement is kind of the same basic process of movement that happens from, me this morning to me now. They're different. I'm in a different state than I was this morning, right? Even all my perceptions, my thoughts, they're changing from moment to moment. Whoever there was this morning is gone and never coming back. But I still recognize that as being connected to me. So, that's the basic answer. I know that when I was first getting into Buddhism, I had this question too. And it sort of bothered me that there wasn't like a precise mechanism for how does the consciousness move from the one to the next, and like how does it like fly through space, or how does the connection happen? I want the exact mechanism of it explained in scientific terms. I wanted that very badly. And I was at first very angry, actually, when I was first getting into Buddhism, that I wasn't able to have that specific part explained to me. And I still haven't had that specific part explained to me in a way that I can sort of make sense of, like to say, okay, how does it work in terms of science?
It sounds like maybe I don't know what reincarnation is or what a soul is, because I get this definition that you just outlined. I totally get that. It's like an evolution. It's like a database that keeps increasing, and you add and you add and you add data. And, it's not the original data because there's more data. If I'm using a scientific analogy, I get that. And I get that there's no immortal soul. It's not a fixed thing. So maybe I don't understand what reincarnation and this idea of soul really means, because to me, this continuity, a lot of people associate the continuity with this idea of a soul. So I don't know. I mean, it's maybe just a question of semantics, but.
The point of the teaching really is an understanding of karma, an understanding that the way that you're acting right now will have effect in the future. Even if you don't see them in this life, it's not nothing. And so to me, that's a very important basis ethically for Buddhism. I did have my early skeptical phase when I had a lot of difficulty actually with the concept of rebirth early on. Like really a lot. I was very angry about it. But over time, I found that it made ethical sense, that it made my life better to act as if the karma mattered and would carry on and wasn't just sort of lost and going nowhere. And Ananea, would you like to say something?
For me, it's kind of the opposite. What Demi is expressing, and what she's saying is not an uncommon issue or question for people coming into Buddhism. But for me, it made so much sense it was like, how do you account for the huge disparities among all the people, the billions of people that are in the world? It never made sense. You know what I mean? It's like, how, okay, so somebody comes in and they're King Charles yesterday, gets crowned yesterday, and somebody else lives in Bangladesh and has terrible conditions, and on and on. It never, but I first was introduced to the concept of reincarnation prior to becoming Buddhist, and rebirth makes sense to me. I mean, it just in the whole long, play when and it has to do with also, I'm not caught up in the having to have scientific proof, because there are things in the world that you'll never have scientific proof for. It's a mystery. Part of it is a mystery. We will never know until we become enlightened, whatever that experience will actually be. So anyway, so I for me, it just, as I say, it just made sense that over long periods of time there would be development. Long periods of time would create a particular situation based on karma and causality, etc. That just made perfect sense to me. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but just adding that.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you, Ananea. Yeah, I think there's, depending on previous conditioning, there's all sorts of different reactions to the idea. Some people think it makes sense, some people, don't. Or for me, it took a while. It didn't make sense at first. I think now it does. Not necessarily on the scientific level, but on the level of living a life and looking around at how other people are living their lives. I think it makes a lot of sense. But, well, I don't know, maybe not a but it took me a while. It took me a while to get to that point. Yeah. So, and it took a lot of just sort of contemplation and reading and study and consideration. And at some point, it started to make sense. It started to really inform my life and how I'm acting right now. With that as an underlying basis, I feel like I can act more skillfully in the world. And that's the part that makes sense to me, is that it helps guide how I am in the world today, right now. So that's my take on it. And, it's a perennial topic. Dinwi, do you want to say anything more, or shall we? I do want to get to the end of this sutta because it has a really good end. There's a punchline.
No, I'm good.
Okay, so we only have a few minutes left. I'm going to read through the rest, I think, and I do want to get to the end. So the mother has passed away and been reborn in the Tusita heaven, but there's still some more details about the birth. I have learned this in the presence of the Buddha. Other women carry the infant in the womb for 9 or 10 months before giving birth. Not so the mother of the being intent on awakening. She gives birth after exactly 10 months. This too, I remember as an incredible quality of the Buddha. So yeah, what if you could just schedule that? I have learned this in the presence of the Buddha. Other women give birth while sitting or lying down. Not so the mother of the being intent on awakening. She only gives birth standing up. And, there's a lot of depictions of this in Buddhist art. She's holding onto the branch of a tree, kind of leaning, and it says the baby comes out of her side in this sort of very clean way. So she gives birth standing up. When he emerges from his mother's womb, gods receive him first, then humans. So they sort of, the devas come and catch the baby. When the being intent on awakening emerges from his mother's womb, before he reaches the ground, 4 gods receive him and place him before his mother, saying, Rejoice, O Queen, an illustrious son is born to you. When the being intent on awakening emerges from his mother's womb, he emerges already clean, unsoiled by waters, mucus, blood, or any other kind of impurity, pure and clean. Suppose a jewel treasure was placed on a cloth from Kasi. The jewel would not soil the cloth, nor would the cloth soil the jewel. Why is that? Because of the cleanliness of them both. In the same way, he emerges already clean, unsoiled by waters, blood, mucus, any other kind of impurity. Then even though he is already clean, 2 streams of water appear in the sky, one cool, one warm, for bathing the being intent on awakening and his mother. So again, it's just everything very clean and nice and beautiful with this birth. And yet the Buddha's signature teaching later on is going to be birth is dukkha, aging is dukkha, death is dukkha. So I think it's interesting that even this very clean, lovely birth is dukkha in some sense. I have learned this in the presence of the Buddha. As soon as he's born, the being intent on awakening stands firm with his own feet on the ground. Facing north, he takes 7 strides with a white parasol held above him, surveys all quarters, and makes this dramatic proclamation. I am the foremost in the world. I am the eldest in the world. I am the first in the world. This is my last rebirth. Now there are no more future lives. This too, I remember as an incredible quality of the Buddha. So, yeah, again, sounds a little full of himself. Oh, the Devas brought the parasol. Yeah, definitely the Devas carrying the parasol. But yeah, I mean, again, this is just the, sort of the confidence, like he's come out of this, many, many lifetimes of preparation, and then the gathering strength in the realm of the joyful gods, and then this very pleasant, safe, healthy, happy birth. And he comes out confident, just sure of himself, sure that this is it. And again, not, we can read this and think, oh, pride, but it's not pride if it's true. If it's just a recognition of what is best in the world and of what is embodied in himself here, the Bodhisattva is not wrong. And so this is actually an incredible sort of confidence. There's many suttas where the Buddha or one of the Arahants will, we call it roaring the lion's roar, where they'll say what their own great qualities are. And if it's true, if they really have realized and done all the things that they say, it's not pride, it's just the truth. So that's, I think, how we have to look at this. Okay, another one. I've learned this in the presence of Buddha. He emerges from his mother's womb. And then once again, there is this great light, the same description as before. Magnificent light surpassing the glory of the gods, even in the boundless desolation of interstellar space. And again, the beings reborn in the darkness of interstellar space see each other, and the galaxy shakes and rocks and trembles, and an immeasurable light appears in the world. This too, I remember as an incredible and amazing quality of the Buddha. So, this is the end of what Ananda has to say. And then the Buddha comes in himself to give one last incredible quality. He says, well then, Ananda, you should also remember this as an incredible and amazing quality of the realized one. It's that the realized one knows feelings as they arise, as they remain, and as they go away. He knows perceptions as they arise, as they remain and as they go away. He knows thoughts as they arise, as they remain, and as they go away. This too, you should remember as an incredible and amazing quality of the realized one. And Ananda agrees, and he repeats, "Sir, the Buddha knows feelings as they arise, as they remain, as they go away. He knows perceptions and thoughts as they arise, as they remain, and as they go away. This too I remember as an incredible and amazing quality of the Buddha." That's what Ananda said, and the teacher approved. Satisfied, those mendicants were happy with what Venerable Ananda said. So this is the punchline. After all these amazing sort of miraculous events, to go back to my metaphor about giving birth to awakening, of sort of feeling that within yourself and how that changes your experience in a way that is, more pleasant, more beautiful, more pure, more wonderful in various ways, or it can sometimes. The practice is meant to lead to greater joy and peace and ease with things. Still, the greatest miracle is not that peace and ease in itself, but that it allows for this kind of clear knowledge of things as they are, of things as they arise and remain and go away, just here in this experience. Not something that you have to hear tell about from somebody else. It's something that you can know clearly for yourself. And in a way, it's an incredible and amazing quality of the Buddha, because he looked at these things so closely, so carefully, was able to see so clearly. And that's what led to his actual great awakening. But it's also something that any practitioner can recognize and can work with. And you don't have to have had this miraculous birth. It's just sort of the miracle of that awakening continues. So anyway, any thoughts here? Anything anyone like to come in with? Karina.
Yeah, just kind of like a quick question. Do we know anything as far as like when the Buddha was born, if he, what level of stage of enlightenment he had, or did he go from like 0 to full on?
Right. Well, this is, as far as I know, this is not really clearly stated anywhere, and then it's debated because nobody explicitly says in the ancient texts. It seems like the Bodhisattva is kind of on a different career track than the average practitioner, the average disciple of the Buddha. So, those who are followers of the Buddha then have this 4-stage process of, stream entry and once return and non-return, and before they can become arahants. Whereas for the Buddha, even in so many stories of his earlier lives, it never says, oh, he attained stream entry. It never says there was a point when that happened. Like the start of his story is when he met a previous Buddha many, many eons ago, and made a dedication that he was going to be reborn as a Buddha himself someday. And he maintained that dedication through, many, many eons, many, many lives, and eventually realized it. But yeah, there's not really a point where, at least according to the text that we have, they say that, okay, he attained stream entry. So it could be that it was just kind of all at once that one night of his awakening. But also it's based on these many, many eons of lifetimes that was possible. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Has anyone learned something different? I don't know of this actually being explicitly said anywhere, but I am curious if others have heard other things.
Yeah, that answers my question. And it also makes me curious, or the first part reminds me of like a stream enterer has, only a certain number of lives set that before they're reborn, Is it 1 to 7?
Yeah.
And so there's sort of, I wonder if they know that when they're born, or maybe they know the kind of things that you know as a baby before you become fully conscious. So I'm also kind of curious of how the Buddha was growing up. If he was, so he said that as when he was born, or that was proclaimed, but did he grow up thinking that also, or did it happen much later?
Right. It sort of seems like he forgot about it a little bit in between. He was certainly still like a remarkable child, but his parents were doing their best to distract him. And, at least for a little while, it seems like they had a degree of success, that he was not just like laser focused on this from day one. It took him till age 29 before he went forth, because he'd been distracted by all the sensual pleasures that his parents were dangling in front of him, hoping that he was going to, hoping he was going to continue the lineage, to be his father's heir and lead the kingdom and all of that. So they didn't want him to go forth, even though there was this prophecy that he was either going to be a Buddha or a wheel-turning monarch, and his family was hoping for the wheel-turning monarch career path, and tried to turn him in that direction. But eventually he sort of got around it. Can we have Sharanya and then Anane?
So, this sutta to me sounds like it's pretty consistent with the Buddha's view on supernatural powers. So he's always said that doesn't matter more than the practice itself. So here his disciples are just extolling all of his miraculous deeds when he was born. But what he's really saying is that's not as important as my mindfulness practice, just knowing when I'm thinking that I'm thinking, when I'm feeling, when I'm feeling, when I'm perceiving, I'm perceiving. So he's bringing it back to the basic simplicity of his teaching, as opposed to the more complex, wondrous deeds that most of us kind of get, are in awe of. So he's saying that that's not as important as actually just basic mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
Would you see it that way yourselves?
Yes, basically. I mean, I think this sutta, all of the miracles and so forth, are meant to, they're meant to inspire us and to uplift us and sort of get us interested. They may land differently for different people, but at least some people will find that this kind of thing really gets them interested and like, okay, who is this being then? And want to know more and want to practice and so forth. But yeah, I would agree that just seeing something from afar and being inspired by it is not, not the end of the path. It can get you started, but you do have to do this mindful practice for yourself at some point. So it can be an inspiration and a support to consider all these amazing qualities of the Buddha, but really the most amazing one is that he had this practice of mindfulness and was able to share it with others, and that we can also do it now. That is actually the greatest miracle. And so I think, yes, to me, like the last one here is actually the most important one. And Anaya?
I agree with that. Just real quick, when you talk about was he stream enter or any of those things, in the life from the time he was born till he sets out to go on his path, discover his path. Now there are stories about his growing up years or whatever, but that he was very intelligent, that he was able to absorb the the Vedas and was completely conversant with all the teachings or whatever. So, and he was trained as a warrior while he was the best of the best. So while that didn't cause him to become enlightened, but it just indicates that he had a level coming in that is just not, not the average everyday person coming into a lifetime. So,
Yeah, definitely.
and that he made it, and that we get the benefit of that is, of course, as we're saying, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think actually another piece that comes to mind for me is that, everything about his life was so good, right? The way he came into it and the way he was raised and his own skills. And, he was surrounded by a loving family and great material comfort and pleasure and, success in everything that he tried. And all of this, and all of that was not enough. And so that's another piece of the teaching, is that all of that was not enough, but this practice of mindfulness was it. That's what set him free, and that's what can set us free as well, even if we don't have all these amazing abilities. So yeah. We are coming towards the end of our time, or we're actually a little bit over. Are there any last comments before we close?
Hi, this is Damon. Could you clarify that this, let's say, discovery of mindfulness was or was not preceded to have been explored and discovered in some way or fashion earlier than the Buddha, than Gautama Buddha arrived? It was sort of coming out of this thing called sati, which is was around in Hinduism that sort of preceded Buddhism, or not?
Well, there were many, many spiritual seekers around that time. There were the Brahmins and also the samanas, the ascetics, the wanderers. It was this great diversity of spiritual seekers that were around at the time of the Buddha. So he was sort of in both of those traditions. He learned some things about Brahmanism, which is like a precursor of Hinduism. Hinduism as such didn't exist at that time, but Brahmanism over time developed into what we know as Hinduism today. So he was familiar with Brahman teachings, and he also spent time wandering and meeting other teachers of the time, the great spiritual teachers of his time. And he did learn from them. He learned the immaterial absorptions from two of his teachers. And he certainly respected those teachers, because as soon as he awoke, then his first thought about who he could share with was, let me go back to those two teachers, the ones who taught me this, because he said, there's little dust in their eyes, they can see easily. So they hadn't gone all the way, they hadn't realized what he had realized, but they had a practice that was a sort of a genuine spiritual practice, and that was creating the conditions such that he knew they would be able to very easily wake up if he went back and told them what he had figured out. And it happened that those teachers had just passed away, and so he wasn't able to go teach them, but they were his first thought. So, in terms of mindfulness, sati, to what extent was that an extant teaching that he would have encountered? I'm actually not sure historically what exactly would have been taught in that regard. We get in the texts various places where there's descriptions of what other teachers are teaching. And I don't think any of those descriptions mention sati as such, but also, it is like filtered through many thousands of years of, of people who are from a different school and a different perspective, explaining what that school and that perspective was. So I don't know to what extent those are accurate descriptions. I guess basically the answer is I don't know the specific answer to this question, but there were spiritual seekers at that time who were sort of going in the same direction as the Buddha. And then when he awoke, he was able to help them very quickly awake also, because they had already been developing some of the factors necessary for that.
Thank you.
Yes, Seminary Tabira mentions it's an eightfold path, not a one-fold path. So samasati, right mindfulness, is one fold of the path. And the other 7 are necessary also for awakening. And yes, I think, people had been developing some of those factors to some degree. But the Buddha then coming along was able to sort of, supercharge that and like push them over, push them beyond where they might have gotten on their own. But certainly there were good and wise people before, just not quite going all the way.
Yeah.
Showed them the way.
What about the 2,500 years since then? Could that amount also to a supercharge in some respects, neurobiology, and in some way, without being critical, but rather to say that there are added, there's so much that
Sorry, your sound is breaking up a little bit. Can you hear me okay? Can others hear me? Okay, so yeah. I'm sorry, Damon, I think your connection is just dropping out here.
Yeah.
Great.
Now we can't hear you at all.
Right. Yeah, I'm sorry, Damon. We can't hear you. You're falling apart there. If you'd like to type the question in the chat, you can hear us. Okay. All right, Damon, I'm going to mute you, but if you get a good signal, then he dropped off. Okay. All right, so I do want to make sure anyone who needs to go feels free to go. It is past our time, but I do still see hands up. So I'm happy to stay and talk with you, but please, anyone who needs to go, you're welcome to do so. And those who wish to stay and have some more time for Q&A, I'm happy to do that. And I would include those in the room in that if they need to go. Patipada.
The fact that there were previous Buddhas before this one, and that in India, there were so many different spiritual practices, including meditation and different types of meditation. In my thinking and in my thoughts, one of the things that's missing in teaching in the West is the context of the culture in which the Buddha grew up. We tend to extract certain components of information of his life and kind of not include the core traditions and practices that he grew up with. We kind of just put a very light touch on that. So I would say that is really a core component that's missing, because his life was so impressive and his knowledge was so impressive. His practices before he became fully awakened was so impressive, but all of those things get kind of buried by just highlighting final outcome.
Mhm.
So I as a Hindu growing up in the Hindu culture, there's so much that I've learned and practiced, which is a part of what he teaches.
Mhm.
And the context of the being, where he was born, where he grew up, what life was like at that point in time, in that era, in that country, all of those components seem to just kind of be excluded when we're talking about the teaching. So we tend to just extract the teaching itself, and just kind of drop the rest.
Mhm. Yeah, so we have a note from Karina saying, I would agree very much with Patipada. The little bit that I've learned about the Upanishads and the Vedas from being a yoga teacher really helped me see the brilliance of the Buddha's teaching and how it's repurposed so many things to lead towards awakening. Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of the skillful means of the Buddha as a teacher were based on him being really well acquainted with his environment and his culture and his time. He knew how to speak to different people in ways that they could hear and understand because he was acquainted and wise. And yeah, he took sort of similes from daily life that were very, all these beautiful similes that he uses for teaching are drawn from his experience. He has this sort of creative mind to take what he's learned and experienced and then apply that to the Dhamma in ways that people could understand based on that particular material culture in that time, right? So both in terms of the material culture and in terms of knowing what were the teachings of the Brahmins, then he was able to sort of help, to teach the Brahmins when they came to him. They had a shared language, and that was part of his excellence as a teacher, is that he could speak that language with them and then speak differently with the kings or with the other ascetic wanderers or whoever it was. And this is actually one of the marvelous and incredible, amazing qualities of the Buddha, that he could do that based on his amazing knowledge of the culture. And I think it's true that, here in California today, we are quite separated from that culture, and we might not always get the nuances. And, so you grew up Hindu, I did not. So you may have more, a better understanding on that basis than I would in some cases because of the recognition of that culturally. Let's see. Do I have a point here that I'm getting to? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's just what it is. No, it's just what it is. And I think what the gentleman was referring to, sati is a practice in Hinduism.
Mhm.
What the Buddha offered beyond Hinduism, in my experience, is that Hinduism stops with the God realm. The Buddha goes beyond the God realm.
Mhm.
And he teaches us how to practice to be able to attain that. So, and he teaches very detailed practices and also knowledge about the human form and the human process.
Mhm.
So I think that his offerings are much more explicit, and there's much more practicality and everyday application in the way he teaches what he teaches. So, and that's why I'm here, and that's why I practice this. So it's really a joy to have the opportunity to listen to this in a female voice, and in a voice that is much more gentle and inclusive of all humans, because that's what I get from Dhammadharini. And I just wanted to say thank you, you and all of the bhikkhunis there for that.
Yes, and thank you for sharing that. This is, I think it's true that having that cultural context to know, helps us to understand the Buddha better. And thank you for sharing that so we can all understand better. Really appreciate your participation as always. And yeah. Okay, any further questions or comments?
Well, just one more, and that is that the Vipassana practice can only be credited to the Buddha and no one else. In Hinduism, most of the the practices are about jhana states, like it's been stated in the Sutta, but not beyond that. And because of the belief in a permanent soul, the impermanent nature of all things is also something that's not explored in Hinduism. But I thank you all again, like what Pratipada said. Appreciate everything that you're doing for the community.
Well, thank you very much. So I think at the end here, you've both sort of added a couple more of the incredible and amazing qualities of the Buddha in comparison to the other teachers who were there at the time, that he was able to teach these things in this way and bring people onward. And that is what we are still, celebrating here today. So I think let's close here. Anumodana, I appreciate all of your time and attention. And let us pay our respects to the Triple Gem. Close. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sangham Namami. All right. Thank you all. Happy Wesak, and see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.